So the fundamental principle of Baha'u'llah's revelation is the unity of the human race. And all the sacred writings revolve around this fundamental principle. So it was this reason that during my study of the writings, some years ago, I became intrigued by a particular section of a tablet of Baha'u'llah that you'll find in prayers and meditations. So I used some excerpted words to create the title of my discussion today. So here is the actual paragraph. So I testify that no sooner had the first word proceeded through the potency of thy will and purpose out of his mouth, and the first call gone forth from his lips, than the whole creation was revolutionized, and all that in the heavens and on earth was stirred to the depths. Through that word, the realities of all created things were shaken, were divided, separated, scattered, combined and reunited, disclosing in both the contingent world and the heavenly kingdom entities of a new creation, and revealing in the unseen realms the signs and tokens of thy unity and wonders. Because something I'm about to explain is in relation to my interest in finding proofs and evidences from Baha'u'llah's writing, I decided to focus on this interest today. So this is my story. I've often thought that if I could communicate with my younger self, my 16-year-old self, what words of advice would I give her? I would tell her to eat less meat, fat and sugar, and to do yoga. And it wasn't because of the yoga class this morning, which I did not attend, but that's because I didn't attend it, because I haven't done yoga. Anyway, but I would like to have done yoga. So I wouldn't say anything else. And the reason for that is because it's not because I have no regrets or said and done things I wish I hadn't. It's because I am content with where I am with my life. And I wouldn't want to do anything that didn't bring me to this point in my life. And that's the point I wanted to make. So every single one of those events has led me to where I am now. And this includes the fact that because I've served at the Baha'i Center for 29 years, I've lived through 3 wars. And I think as an Australian growing up, I would never have thought I would have actually experienced any war. So all those wars were stressful. And there were a number of nights that actually put my body into shock. But there was one night in particular that has the catalyst for today's discussion. It was in 2006 during the Israel-Lebanon war. And after about 32 days of non-stop missile attacks, including 1,500 that hit Haifa alone. And these are not things you'll probably find in the media, because the media doesn't like to put a particular viewpoint forward about Israel. But anyway, so it was on this particular night, after 32 days, that the air raid siren sounded again. And it was about 7 p.m. in the evening. And I lived on the top floor of a 3-level apartment building. I had no safe room, no bomb shelter in my home. So I had to run down the stairs, hide at the rear of a concrete stairwell, and seek safety. And then shortly after getting to the bottom of the stairs, the missiles hit. And this time they hit far closer than they've ever hit. My building shook violently. I could hear people screaming, and I knew instinctively that there must be dead on the street outside. A man ran in off the street into my stairwell seeking shelter, and I asked him, "Are there dead outside?" And he was too shocked himself to speak, so he ran out. That night was declared a mass casualty event in Israel. But there were 2 things that happened to me that night. 2 simultaneous thoughts. One, I truly understood the purpose of life. And the second, I wondered why these people who did not know me wanted to kill me. And I know it sounds irrational, but I took the missile attack personally. And when you're on the receiving end of such violence, you really do start thinking about life. And it seemed to me that those firing those missiles into Israel did not care anything, not just about me, but about anybody who lived in Israel. They didn't see us as human, they're equal, or having a life worth living. And I strongly suspect that Israel's response to those missiles may have led observers to think the same thing about Israel's attack on Hezbollah. But the merit of those points of view are not the issue today. But the point is that this situation highlighted the fact that the world is divided into us and them. And this seemed to me the heart of the issue. And when I started thinking about this dichotomy, I remembered how I felt when I first started working, and I've realised I've just gone back. When I first started working in 1975. And when I started working, I received 2/3 of my male equivalent in wages. And when I asked why I received so much less, I was told, well, it's because he's a man, and one day he'll marry and have children to support. I said, but he's not married now. And they said, it doesn't matter, one day he will. And the other thing that bothered me at the time was the fact that I had to call every partner, who of course were all male, Mr. And yet every male in the office, irrespective of age and qualifications, called the partners by their first name. And this particularly grated on me. And I knew that in order to be accepted as an equal to whatever male, I had to work twice as hard. And there's never been a time in my life that I didn't consider myself equal to every other human being on the planet, as we all should. But for the first time, I experienced what I call institutionalized discriminatory treatment, and the injustice of it grated daily. I was powerless to take action, and that also made it that much more difficult for me. And when we treat people differently, no matter whatever the reason, whether it be because of race or gender or politics or nationalism or class or religious beliefs, all these require a viewpoint that promotes an us versus them dichotomy. I endured a number of years of prejudice because of my gender, but affirmative action was not introduced in Australia until the 1980s. And then things did start to change. There's still a long way to go in relation to gender issues, and the Me Too movement has brought to the fore predatory behaviour by some men when they're in positions of influence and power. And let's not forget that the most dangerous time in a woman's life is when she's pregnant. The very time when she should have the support and love of the man who's fathering her child. This is when she's most likely to get murdered. And women and girls have been victims of both domestic and sexual abuse and been forced into sexual slavery and not given the same educational opportunities as their male relatives. And then there's the disparity between the rich and the poor. And this has been in the media a lot just the last few days because of the fire in the Notre Dame Cathedral. So then, of course, there's racism. And the fact that we have some members of Black Lives Matter here with us this weekend has given us an extraordinary opportunity for dialogue, discussion and growth. As Baha'is, we know that racism is the most vital and challenging issue facing many countries, and particularly in the United States. And Shoghi Effendi in 1938 said that racial prejudice has attacked the whole social structure of the United States. I mean, that's how serious it is. So you would think that with the intervening years, things would have got better. And we look at the news that comes out from the United States and we think, actually, I think it's probably worse. So this scourge needs to be eradicated from the face of the earth. And then when we think about such organisations as Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and the Baha'i community, and we think we are just small, what can we do? And I'm reminded of a statement made by Margaret Mead, who many of you may not know, but she was the 20th century's greatest anthropologist. And she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So I became a Baha'i 34 years ago. And the pivotal principles of the teaching of Baha'u'llah about the unity of the human race made me rethink my whole life up until that point in time. And I wanted to understand everything about my new faith. I had been raised Catholic, but I had left the Catholic Church when I was about 18 or 19 years of age. So now at the age of 30, I decided, yes, I want to become a Baha'i. And I've realised my whole aspect towards humanity was lacking. Its logical and rational principles were what really attracted me to the Baha'i faith, particularly progressive revelation. But I tried to understand the timing of two events that occurred in May 1844. And one was the declaration of the Bab to Mullah Hussein on the evening of the 22nd of May. And then the other was less than 48 hours later when Samuel Morse sent the world's first telegraphic message. And we know that there needed to be a human being with a spiritual capacity to accept the Bab's message, and that was Mullah Hussein. But what was the significance of the timing of this world's first telegraphic message? And I had been told by many people that it was the sign of this incredible spiritual energy that has been released to the world. And no doubt that's correct. But that statement never made complete sense to me. Because I wanted a rational explanation. So in fact I searched for it. And I found it. So Abdu'l-Baha was, there's a transcription of his talk which he gave in London. So in the book Abdu'l-Baha in London, it said, "Where the ever-widening circle of man's knowledge meets the spiritual world, a manifestation of God is sent to mirror forth his splendour." So when a manifestation of God comes, there must be the human being with the spiritual capacity. But there must also be the means and instruments of implementing his message. So no manifestation of God is going to come if he cannot actually implement that message. And the means and instruments were now available. For the first time in world history, we were able to begin global communication. And the Bab is the precursor. He came early to prepare the world for Baha'u'llah's message. And Baha'u'llah's message is the unity of the human race. So how are we to unite? Well, the first means of uniting is to be able to communicate. So for the first time in history, we have both the spiritual message and the means and instruments, the start of that, to unite humanity because we can now communicate. So for me, it was very much an aha moment. And it was obviously more, not just the spiritual energy being released, but now we have the technological means to do so. So I started looking at what else I could find that independently indicated that the coming of the twin manifestations of God had changed the world. So Baha'u'llah tells us to find the proofs and evidences. So when a manifestation of God, the world actually changes not from the time of their declaration, but from their birth. And 2017, we celebrated 200 years since the birth of Baha'u'llah, and this year we're celebrating 200 years since the birth of the Bab. So in those 200 years, I should be able to see proofs that the world has changed. So for 13,000 years, Homo sapiens has been the only human form on the planet. So let's go back 200 years. That means 12,800 years Homo sapiens have been here. For 12,800 years, archaeologists, anthropologists, and sociologists have been able to show that the birth rate remained the same. And it didn't matter where you lived, whether it was Europe, Asia, Africa, Pacific, the Americas. Your lifespan was the same. The distance travelled from your home remained the same. Your gross domestic product didn't change. You ate the same amount of food. You lived the same amount of years. You buried the same number of children. No measure of every measure of human life remained flat for 12,800 years. And in 1804, finally the world's population reached 1 billion people. So remember I said this quote, that the whole creation was revolutionized and the realities of all created things were shaken, etc. So for 200 years, what have we seen? If you look at birth rate alone, the population of the world, so in 1804 we had 1 billion people. It took 12,800 years to do that. It took 123 years to double it. 33 years to add another billion. 14 years to add 4 billion, to get to 4 billion. 13 years to reach 5 billion. 12 years to reach 6 billion. That was 1999. We're at 7.8 billion people. And if you think about population alone, that's extraordinary that the growth rate of humanity has grown at a geometric rate. So people try to look at what caused this extraordinary population growth in the world. And there were 200 different theories proposed, from improved cleanliness and sanitation, the invention of antibiotics, the invention of the steam engine, the second industrial revolution. But none of these proposals fully explained what was happening in the world. And remember, this quote talks about the whole creation is revolutionized and the realities of all created things. And it's everything. It's everybody. It's every institution. So let's think about the governance in the world over that period of time. So in the early 19th century, up until 1922, the British Empire controlled a quarter of the world's population. And then you had the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal dynasty, the Qing dynasty, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the German and the Dutch empires. None of them exist now. They're all gone. And even if that was enough to think about, this shaking, this revolutionizing, then we had the First World War, which was known as the War to End All Wars, which of course it wasn't, unfortunately. And that war killed 19 million people and wounded a further 23 million. And at the last 8 months of the First World War, what's called the Spanish flu gripped the world. And it killed, conservatively, 50 million people, but it's perhaps even higher than that. They think somewhere between 3 and 6% of the world's population died from the Spanish flu. And a quarter of the world's population got the Spanish flu. So you had, in the space of 5 or 6 years, from the beginning of the First World War to the end of the Spanish flu, you had maybe over 110 million people dead and over 250 million people sick. 25% of the world's population. So losing such a significant global proportion of the world's population created an existential crisis in the world. And people began to feel uneasy about their place in the world and started asking questions about who they were and what was their purpose. And it was from this time that sociologists have traced the origin of the modern question of identity. Rather than creating new roles for people started discrediting their leaders and those in authority. And these further questions were exacerbated in the following years leading up to the Second World War. And many of you here in this room are Europeans, so you know the effects of the Second World War. They still probably linger, and you learnt your history. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people in the Second World War. And I think somewhere between 80 and 90 million people died during the Second World War, or because of the ravages that followed the Second World War. And then there were the atomic bombs dropped in Japan. And then the Holocaust killed 6 million Jews. And then since then, you've also got ethnic cleansing in Rwanda, Uganda, Armenia, Myanmar. And this incredible disequilibrium in the world is continuing. And so when you look at this shaking and dividing and separating, we see extraordinarily severe evidences globally. And then you look at the rise of isms to replace the power structures that ended. You've got communism, socialism, capitalism, liberalism, fascism, Nazism. There's probably a few others. And some of you may wish to think about other things that have happened in the world in the last 200 years to show the destruction of the disequilibrium of society is. Any of you want to offer any thoughts? Okay. So let's go back to the telegraph in 1844. The world's technological achievements since 1844. So the telegraph, when it came, it revolutionized the way humans interact. So now we call such technologies disruptive innovations because they change the way we behave. So no one is going to look at a motor vehicle and say, it's a better horse. Or they're not going to look at the light bulb and say, it's a better candle. We're not talking something evolutionary, we're talking revolutionary. So actually, I'm going to go back to this quote. So this is the full quote, and this is the quote taking some key words, because these are the ones we're focusing on. So we've looked at the whole creation was revolutionized, and the realities of all created things were shaken. I think 2 world wars, the collapse of all the power structures in the world, that's a shaking. And then dividing and separating. So I think there are quite a few evidences of that if we start thinking about it. So the telegraph enabled the world to communicate globally faster than was ever possible. So I'd like you to think about every technological invention since 1844. And every one of them serves Baha'u'llah's goal of uniting humanity. So we had the Morse code in 1844, the telegraph, the telephone, television, the light bulb, the camera. Okay, so I'd like you to tell me some, please. The internet? Mobile phones, yes. Come on, there's plenty. Telescopes, huh? Satellites. Airplanes. Solar energy, yes. Computers, we've talked about the internet, computers. We've got very fast and cheap means of communicating with each other, with Skype, with WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, the Internet of Things, Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, self-driving vehicles. Okay. So in the 175 years since Samuel Morse invented the telegram, we now have numerous ways of communicating and uniting globally. Of the 7.8 billion people in the world, 4.5 billion of them have access to the World Wide Web, and 2.8 billion have smartphones. So remember the quote at the beginning about the shaking, dividing, separating, etc. And the creation of new entities. So one of those new entities that's been created is the digital platform, the digital world. And people spend a lot of time on it. 30 years, that's all we've had of this digital platform. And I'm talking about the World Wide Web, I'm not talking about internet. Internet preceded it. So this new creation has many types of uses: scientific, business, government, and social. And all those advances have been based on science alone. In fact, it was science that spawned the internet as a means for sharing scientific knowledge. As the purpose of Baha'u'llah's coming is the unity of the human race, and because there have been so many positive technological advances in the world, I've chosen to focus the rest of this discussion on social media. And I have my own prejudices and views in relation to that, which will probably become a little evident. So, is social media the type of entity Baha'u'llah envisaged as uniting humanity? Remember, its ancestor is the telegraph. And has this form of technology been impacted by this question of identity? So the uses of social media for good. Can some people like to share some of those?
Like a campaign, like the Me Too movement.
Right, okay. So people can hear about it, yes?
Sharing stories.
Sharing stories, yes.
Finding old friends and connecting.
Yeah, exactly. Finding old friends and connecting. Sharing photos. I mean, I sent some photos of Deport conference on Instagram. And
Crowdfunding.
huh? Crowdfunding, yes. Charitable giving, yeah. Sorry?
Not having to send cards to everybody, just put it up.
Oh, yeah, yes. I mean, really, who sends New Year cards or Nowruz cards anymore? The Baha'i will send it to us. Anyway, so to Israelis. Okay. So the uses of social media for good, I think, are well known. And it helps bring people across continents far better than anything else can. And it provides a platform for information about social causes. And it informs people about how to attend charitable or social events. And it calls for volunteers in a crisis. But it's also provided many people with opportunities to find like-minded people. And I think sometimes, particularly perhaps when we're teenagers, we feel like we're the only one in the world who's like the way we are. And maybe I was. But anyway. So, and I know, you see, I was very geeky, might surprise you, as a teenager. And so you think, well, you know, nobody else is like you. But now with social media, you can actually find similarly minded people. And there are some very strange Facebook groups, for example. And sometimes I like to look through Facebook and find what are the weirdest Facebook groups. And one of those is a group of people who call themselves Fairies. Has anyone heard of them, apart from me? Okay, a few of you. Oh, young ones at that. Wow. Actually, that worries me a bit. Sorry. Mary, that's your children. Yes. Yes. Anyway, so furries. Furries are people who like to dress up in giant furry costumes and get together and maybe, just maybe, to have sex together. Anyway, yes. So, but some of them say it's not about sex. But anyway. And inside a furry costume, you can be anything. So you're an animal. You've got no gender. You've got no gender. You've got no anything. You've got no human form. So, problem is, even though we're able to communicate with all forms of people, all interested people, all around the world, despite this, people are finding themselves less connected than ever before. And almost half of us are feeling lonely and isolated, despite all these extraordinary opportunities for connection. And there are a number of reasons why. Any thoughts about why? Yeah.
Well, social media depends on how you use it. Obviously, if you are thoroughly aligned with your mission and you share it with the world, you can have a huge impact. But if it's used, or if you use it to project a sort of a false image or mask of who you are, for me, this is how I understand it, is the greater the gap between your truest self and this, seeking of approval from others. The bigger that gap, the lonelier you're going to be, because the more disconnected you are from Source, God, your true self, however you want to frame it.
Yeah.
Because you're actually, you're putting out this mask, seeking for other people to validate you, and even if they do, there's always the fear that they're going to reject you. So your whole sense of happiness is based on something outside of your control, and that's a recipe for misery.
Yeah. Yes, people are not having real conversations at times. They're not being their genuine self, authentic self, yes.
I think also social media portrays a completely fake
reality, if that makes sense. Like these images that lots of teenagers are aspiring to look like, with perfect skin, perfect body, can isolate you because you're like, I don't look like that, and then that creates a negative space. And also, I think I work at a school, and they were telling us about this story of this girl who committed suicide because she found other people who were also into these kind of things, and she was able to find through these hashtags. So hashtags can also like bring negative. You were talking about how people can connect on one level, they can also connect to negative things and groups that are not so positive or help you. It's quite interesting to get both sides of it.
Yes.
I think it's also creating human beings who don't know how to have proper social interactions with people who are older or younger than them, or even the same age as them. Things as simple as eye contact become difficult for people who only communicate on social media, so then they become socially isolated, and then they grow up and makes it a lot harder for them to live like a normal human being.
You can't read social cues by uses of emojis. Yes.
You know these signs in restaurants?
Yeah.
You sometimes find those signs in restaurants that says, no, we don't have any Wi-Fi, talk to each other.
I remember I actually was at a dinner at a restaurant one night where everybody was sitting looking at their phone and don't know what they were doing, and then someone said, let's take a group photo, and suddenly they put the phones down, they smile, get close to each other, and then as soon as the photo's over they go back to their phones. And I'm like, it used to bother me when I would go into a store and to seek assistance, and then the phone would ring, and the person at the end of the phone who did not make the effort to go to the store got assistance. Where I'm standing there, I actually entered the store, and it's the same thing. Here we are having a meal out with friends, and they're not interacting with each other. Yeah.
I have a great suggestion for this situation. When you're sitting at a table with like 5-6 people, you say to everybody put your phone in the middle of the table. Whoever wants to touch his phone pays the bill for all.
Oh, that's a good solution. Yes, I like that. So Andy's actually got on his phone at the moment. He's taking notes. Okay, all right. So how should we think?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Oh, sorry, John.
Just to add to about interaction, social interaction, I think also social media, well, at least something I find with social media, is that it gives you the promise that you can find a much better connection with someone further away or somewhere else, very specifically. So you think, okay, well, right now I'm surrounded by a bunch of people, but we're not all interested in the exact same thing. If I go online, I could find a group of people who want to wear animal costumes while eating ice cream at the drive-in cinema, and so you're looking for that perfect match. But,
Sorry, Colleen.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, the way I phrased that to somebody was that through social media, we can make friendships based on resonance rather than residence. But ideally, if we can make the resonance and the residence at the same time, it's even better again. So you resonate with people who share some of their values or interests, and you can find your tribe. But like you say, if you can find them locally as well, it's all good.
Right, and
I manage 36 groups and pages on Facebook, and I manage also a Twitter account, and I could do amazing things with it. So, for example, I started a group on the Lappers Forest oxygen factory some years ago, and I could create a forest of 10 hectares out of social media. People are always so negative about social media, but I think it's really positive. For example, I have also a group for people who are ill. These people can't get out their houses. They don't have any contact with people. And I have 3,600 people on it talking about their illness. So we get people together also. It's very positive. You can obtain a lot of things with it. And you can inform a lot of people. On my Twitter account only, I reach 3 million people every 28 days. So it is never possible for me as a human being to get in touch with so many people. So it's a miracle. If you use it on the right way, You can do a lot of things with it. So
And I think that is
so
the
negative.
point. No, but in fact, that's at the beginning I said that there are many positive things about it, but there's also some negative. And I actually haven't really got into the serious negative parts of it yet, which I'm about to. Okay. So Baha'u'llah said in the Kitabi Akdas that he has made music as a ladder for your souls, a means whereby they may be lifted up unto the realm on high. Make it not therefore as wings to self and passion. So a ladder can take you up, as in music can take you up to reach the realm on high. It's the spiritual connection we have. Or it can bring us down to the wings of self and passion. And so if we use a ladder going up and down as a metaphor for life, then this same technology of social media can be seen as a ladder that unites us going up, and something that brings us down as disuniting us. And so there are people on social media who use its anonymity to attack people. And over the past 5 years, there have been an incredible increase in mass casualty attacks in a number of countries. And look at what happened last month in New Zealand. And in fact, that really hit me because the person murdering all these people was Australian, and he grew up less than an hour away from where I grew up. And it was New Zealand. I mean, you think of New Zealand as one of the most peaceful, quiet countries in the world, and to have such violence, it was very disturbing. The whole nature of it was just, any attack is disturbing. And these people instigating these attacks are often seen as mentally unstable or disaffected or people who are prone to violence. And somehow they self-connect with some ideological or political cause, and they use that cause to motivate an act of violence. So what we've seen over the past few years is an increase in how political rhetoric has become much more demonizing. And your opponent isn't just somebody you disagree with on matters of principle or policies. It's somebody who's corrupt, or the person is evil. And there is no hesitation in the world now about saying this. I mean, without naming any particular American president, I mean, you'll hear all the time the person saying these, person's evil or corrupt or whatever. And so political speech is now serving to motivate these same disaffected, violence-prone individuals to conduct attacks. And we are seeing this political rhetoric globally, encouraging them by giving them a sense of purpose. And they look at the sense of purpose through social connection. And they see it even as a life accomplishment. Up until this point in time, these people may have thought, well, I've achieved nothing, and then I've done nothing, what am I doing with my life? So they go on social media, they find a group of people that think similarly to them, and then finally they find their life's purpose. And they go out and kill people. And in their mind, it makes their life meaningful and credible. And so for many of them, they see the problems in their life and in the world as being caused by immigrants or refugees. And that's what happened in New Zealand. The attacker focused on Muslims as the cause of the world's problems. Or they see people of other races as problems. And it seems to me that the trigger for this disaffected life is the lack of purpose that they have and their feelings of disenchantment. They conclude that the source of their problem is the other, those who are not like them. And they blame their failure to find meaning in their life on the other. And in some countries, they blame their inability to find employment on the rise of immigrants or refugees. And in France, the social unrest is the widening gap between the rich and the poor. And the fire in Notre Dame has highlighted that these people clearly had enough money to suddenly come forward and give over €1 billion to rebuild the Notre Dame. But can they give €1 billion so easily to help the poor in their country? And this is obviously causing a lot of dissatisfaction, and you've got the yellow vest movement. Yeah.
I tell him about the Gucci people with $500 million.
Yes. Yeah. And then we look at refugees. And last night, Arthur Dahl gave us a wonderful presentation on the migrant issue facing the world. And a lot of these people who are fleeing life-threatening situations are treated as criminals by a number of Western countries, or people in those countries. Last year alone, over 44,000 people a day became new refugees. And this displacement of over 70 million people globally is a humanitarian crisis. And in the past, you would have had international organisations looking at how to create policy changes to help people. But instead, social media is telling us that the world is facing a marauding horde of battle-axe-wielding individuals charging borders around the world, waiting on the sideline, ready to kill you, take your property, rape your wives and daughters, steal your jobs. And the people spreading this hate are doing so because they fear redundancy, because it's changed the racial or social dynamic of their country. And this mischaracterization of the threat is a big part of the problem that feeds into the hostility of these attackers. There's no justification for attacking any human being, but the rhetoric that's coming from some world leaders feeds into this dichotomy of an us versus them viewpoint. And let's not forget fake news. I mean, I really didn't think I'd ever heard the phrase fake news before 2016. And I know that there's been obviously many myths and lies spread for centuries. And as I researched it, I did find that. But this idea of fake news promotes a particular viewpoint, whether for political or financial gain, and it's a form of propaganda. And it even targets legitimate news sources. And I read recently that a lot of teenagers, and we have some in the room, don't believe legitimate news sources. They prefer to get their news from social media. And if people want to listen to anybody in social media, listen to Lady Gaga, who said social media is the toilet of the internet. I mean, really, it says something. So here we are living in a period of post-truth politics. It reminds me of the importance of one of the fundamental principles of the faith, the independent investigation of truth. We should always bear that in mind. Social media is a descendant of the telegram. And the telegram was an instrument that was used to serve Baha'u'llah's purpose to unite humanity. But just as something can serve that purpose, it can have the other effect. So every time we use an instrument, we have to make a lot of effort to use it to serve the purpose it was intended for. So even though social media has very many positive effects, because it does provide a platform for disaffected people to feed and vent their hostility, and it gives them a sense of purpose and an identity, which people are searching for, we have to think about how we can use social media to unite always. So these technological achievements that we are witnessing have come from science alone. They have been allowed to flourish without much oversight. And actually the EU is one of the few governments in the world that is looking at the cost of social media. Not directly, but as an aspect of the need for oversight, particularly in relation to privacy. So even though a lot of social media is free, there is a cost. And whole industries have been...
I think the major cost for social media is actually, it's not the use that formed adults do, with social media, but what it's doing to children and young adolescents. It is a fact, not an opinion of mental health issues due to that. Now, you mess with childhood, you mess with the future. Yes. And I think that we're going to see such traumatic results in the near future in mental health. I mean, we are already witnessing that we are really putting, our future in jeopardy. I think that is the main issue about social media.
Yeah, social media is seen to actually using a screen, and using it and touching it, causes a rewiring of our brains.
And not only that, therapists are up in arms, having to deal with suicide rates in young people, with anxiety attacks, with panic attacks, with depression, and unfortunately they're linking it to the use of social media. So it's undeniable,
Yes.
the positive that adults can make, but it's what it's doing to the future generations.
Yes, and I think when you think about children again, you look at the tech giants themselves. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were notoriously known for not allowing their children to use technology until they were 16. I think they were onto something, obviously.
And they don't allow their
Children, no.
Yes.
Yes.
This, the Silicon
Yeah,
Valley
right.
parents.
Yeah.
They want them to, to play out in the field.
But on the other hand, you have also people who have certain diseases and they get in touch with each other.
Okay, but we're talking, and sorry, I've only got 7 minutes left, so...
But it's always a negative story. I don't like it always the negative story.
It's not only negative. Anyway, so I've got 8 minutes to go, and there's a couple more points I really would like to make, if you don't mind. Thank you. So whole industries have been born that mine personal data with the intent of changing how we think about certain people and institutions. You look at the US elections, Brexit, to name a few, and I think there's obviously many more. So all this sharing of information has an effect on our brains. And as you mentioned, the effect on children's brains is quite profound. And when you think about being constantly told that a particular type of person is vile for whatever reason, it does affect your brain. And so the EU has set the standard for protecting individuals' privacy, but we also see the tech giants defending their business model. And Google has been fined something like 8.6 billion euros in the EU over the last few years, and Facebook is facing a multi-billion-dollar fine from the Federal Trade Commission in the US in relation to breaches of privacy over the sale of people's personal data to Cambridge Analytica. And more recently, in the past few days, in the media, Facebook is again in trouble because the passwords of people have been found to have been not protected. Okay. So social media does provide a voice for people who have this us versus them dichotomy. And this is because people are concerned that their identity is under attack. So this is one of the main challenges of the times, because as the House of Justice in its 18th of January message this year said, humanity is gripped by a crisis of identity as various peoples and groups struggle to define themselves, their place in the world, and how they should act. And without a vision of shared identity and common purpose, more and more splintering will take place into divergent interest groups that will weaken the cohesion of society itself. So there are a couple of workshops in relation to the study of the 18th January 2019 message. And I did want to look at it in more detail, but I'm conscious of the fact that I only have 5 minutes left and I've got about 15 minutes of talking. So I'm going to jump ahead. So the paragraph of the 2019 message starts with the words rival conceptions about the primacy of a particular people. So study that in detail. And in a later sentence of that same 2019 message, the House of Justice states that fostering unity by harmonising disparate elements and nurturing in every heart a selfless love for humankind is the task of religion. So what is religion? And we all have a desire to find people who share our views, to find a way of connecting, and a desire to belong. And we all want to feel worthy. I think this is just a natural human trait. But too often we are forced to identify ourselves on the basis of religion, race, gender, nationality, class, etc. And if someone said to me, what's my identity? What am I supposed to say? I'm a Baha'i, or I'm an Australian, or a woman, heterosexual, a religious volunteer without any independent financial means. I'm so much more than any of that. And so because the purpose of religion is the fostering of unity, and if I ask somebody what is religion, just a normal person off the street, they would probably say a religion is a belief in a supernatural being, that there are certain rituals and practices and a moral code of conduct. Does everyone agree with that basic understanding of what is religion? And the problem with religion over time is that the further we are away from the manifestation who revealed a particular religion, the more the religion has become affected by distortions, and often by fundamentalism, and so religion itself can become the greatest cause of human alienation, as Abdul Baha said. And it would be better to be without religion than to be a part of a religion that fostered a belief in an us versus them. So Baha'u'llah states that the answer to these two destructive forces of religious fanaticism and ungodliness is true religion. So what is true religion? In a tablet that's recently been translated into English and published in the Call of the Divine Beloved, Baha'u'llah said, and I love this quote, "The beginning of religion is love for God and for his chosen ones, and its end is to manifest that love to his servants." So by viewing religion in this way, Baha'u'llah has redefined religion, or in the vernacular of the day, he's given religion a reboot. See, true religion is the promotion of the unity of the human race. And then we look at science. And remember, science is the only basis of all the technology that we have in the world. And science is knowledge derived from the careful study of the structure and behaviour of the physical world. Yet Baha'u'llah said that the source of all learning is the knowledge of God. And this can only be attained through the knowledge of his divine manifestation. Now, science and religion, we need to see, are the two knowledge systems in the world, and the two go hand in hand. As Albert Einstein said, religion without science is blind, and science without religion is lame. And Abdul Baha said that religion and science are the two wings of a bird. So in order for the bird to fly, you must have both religion and science. So if we look at all the technological achievements we've had, religion has played no part in its evolution. So we see a discordant relationship. Science without religion will be overtaken by materialism. And we see materialism because Google, Facebook, all those, we do want the technology. We do see it has a lot of positive impact, but there's been a cost. So we have to find how to harmonise science and religion in the technological world. So, if we are going to see that science and religion are to coexist and not be the polar opposites that many in the world see them as, how do we do this? Science, if we see religion as a knowledge source, how do we use religion in the world in relation to technology? What does it look like to treat religion as a source of knowledge? We need to test it just like we test science. We need to test it by applying it in action. So how do we apply religion in action? Baha'u'llah asks us to manifest our love for God towards our fellow human being and to regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. And only through education can it cause us to reveal humanity's treasures. So we know that people are crying out to understand who they are, and they've turned to this question of identity. But the endless fragmentation that has resulted from this quest to break down our identity is not solving anything. So we need to start to make changes. And we need to do this through education. So rather than arguing and debating differences, we find these points of unity and the common purpose we can build on. And we need to make sure we don't allow injustice and oppression to find its way into these discussions. So through consultation, we examine the best interests of every component and consider the needs in the context of the well-being of the whole. It doesn't matter if people are receptive to our ideas or not, because everybody is our neighbour. And we are all trying to find our identity and place in the world. Every single one of us is trying to do that. So provided we treat people with love and kindness, and provided we work together so that we can help each other achieve our sense of purpose and identity, then that's a good starting place. And then, like science, we stop and see, is what we're doing working? It's the test that we're doing in relation to religion. And just as in the Baha'i community, there are three protagonists, the individual, the community, and the institutions, we have the same three protagonists in society. So we use the model of action, reflection, consultation, and study, ARCS or SCAR, whatever mnemonic you want to use, or CARS. And we use these while engaging in discourses with the wider community. If something isn't working, stop, reflect, think about it, consult. Why isn't it working? We are trying to build a united humanity. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take great patience. It's going to take a lot of like-minded people who share our vision of the oneness of humanity. But we can succeed together. And together, the more people who share our vision of a united humanity, the more we'll be able to progress. And when looking at somebody's identity, rather than seeing it as a problem or a strangeness or something to fear, or a challenge to what we perceive as a stepping on our rights, we stop the negativity. We find points of uniqueness, of capacity, of beauty. And when we do this, we start to reweave the fabric of society that's become fragmented. And we see the right of every human being to express their uniqueness as a contributor to a totally united human race. And the result becomes this extraordinarily beautiful mosaic of colours, capacities, skills, genders, races, religions, and nationalities. And this requires a rethinking of our social and political structures. And obviously we have a long way to go. So we've already seen the start of entities of a new creation. And soon we will see the signs and tokens of unity and oneness. Thank you.